Job seekers, what's a job interview red flag that instantly screams run? If they mention they're looking for people who are committed and not in it for the money, just get the hell out of there as fast as your feet will take you. Story 2. The whole interview went well until the end. I was qualified for the position and had exactly what they wanted. This was a company that was an affiliate of the company I already worked for, and the manager I was interviewing with asked if I could start the new job the next week if my current boss approved it. Then I made the mistake of asking how much the job paid. The interviewer was offended by this, that I would ask that before being offered the position. He said they were trying to give me a better position. I shouldn't need to ask how much I would be paid. Besides, he hadn't cleared the position with his director yet. He's basically telling me to go quit my current job and start there on Monday without knowing how much they're paying me. Oh, and it might not happen. Story 3. The phrase, if change makes you uncomfortable, this isn't the company for you. Trust me, it's not the company for you. That is code for at any given time. One of our middle managers will make an impulsive, rash decision that completely ducks with your day-to-day work life, and we need you to shut up and not complain about it. Story 4. The interview is not individual, but instead, all potential new hires are herded into a room where a person in an off-the-rack, ill-fitting suit starts to go over charts and graphs. Everyone is then paired up with a senior salesman, even though it was advertised as a marketing position. Story 5. I walked into the interviewer's office, and the TV in his office was on Fox News. Another time I had a neighbor moving in, and there was a shared basement, so I helped. He said he was a DJ, but his assistant was lost in a studio 2 weeks ago, so I said I knew audio equipment and was a quick learner and asked if he would hire me. That's how I got my first job. Another time, I got a job offer, but it was contingent on starting in less than a week. I explained that I needed to give my current employer 2 weeks. They replied with the no deal. They were offering to pay me 2 times what my current job was, so I took it. I still feel bad for leaving that job. Within a month of new job, I could tell the place was completely ducked, and it got worse until the moment I quit and walked out in the middle of the morning meeting. Right after the virus, I, as most of us, was applying to as many jobs as I could. I got a call to interview for a job I didn't apply for. They saw my resume from a larger network I gave my info to. I went through 3 rounds of phone and video interviews for her, but never saw the job title or description. Last round of interviews, I get a tour of the venue, and it seemed pretty cool, and I asked a question that 100% proved I didn't even know what job I was interviewing for. I had done tons of research on company, the venue, the service, everything. I didn't have the job info. This was in front of the CEO of the company. I got the answer, and I realized 2 things. 1, I'm not getting this job. 2, I don't want this job. I got a call to say I didn't get that job, but they set me up with another place that needed what I do. And I did that for 2 years, then went back and did stuff for the first company for a year, and what a goddamn dumpster fire. I quit that place and was much happier. I applied for one place over 20 times for various positions, almost all that I was qualified for. A couple years later, an event labor company put me on a gig with that company. They kept requesting me back and eventually offered me a full-time position. I told them that I had applied a bunch and what was up with that. They, 1 hiring manager, 1 branch manager, 2 project managers, said they never saw any of my applications. I do believe them, and they were paying me more than twice any of those job postings were posted for. Story 6. Telling you to do a trial project to get a feel for your capabilities, not discussing compensation. Any variation of we're a family, more than 2 interviews. Story 7. I currently work as a director of a company where I'm responsible for hiring and training and all that, and it's pretty clear that the different leaders have an almost directly correlated inverse relation between competence and corporate speak. The more incompetent the person is, the more likely they are to use vague and exaggerated corporate language. Note, incompetent leaders are likely the ones that micromanage, because they know they can't fix whatever issue it is, so they micromanage you to make sure you don't duck something up. So my question if I'm being interviewed is always something like, when you're onboarding someone new to your team, how do you teach them to do the core parts of the job? Super simple question, but the incompetent managers will always flaunt some over-engineered onboarding framework and streamline processes through mentoring or whatever nonsense they can come up with. A good manager will mostly just be casual and human. I assume people I hire are relatively self-sufficient, but if they have a question, we'll just look at that specific question/scenario as it comes up. Story 8. When you don't even get called for an interview for 6 months, and then the interviewer happens to let it slip that the only reason they called you was because the other guys didn't last. That happened to me. I found out after being hired that the first person they'd hired, that didn't even last a week before saying, "This isn't for me," and walking out. And the second got fired for being hostile with a coworker, and this was for a technical position. Use your systems and network admin. Allegedly for 50-50, frontline help desk, and actual technical operations. I was fired at 21 weeks for doing work on a server based on a ticket my immediate superior but newer higher than I had given me. Reading between the lines, I've concluded that 1. The boss wasn't skilled at picking the right man for the job and underestimated the level of proficiency new hires had to already have. He was hiring very inexperienced people for a very demanding role and expecting them to hit the ground running with no orientation or support. 2. The most senior of the junior level guys was a toxic AF Tech prima donna who refused to give any actual help unless specifically tasked to do so by someone of both higher rank and higher seniority, and loved trash-talking the newer hires from just over the cubicle wall in that pitch. That means he knows you can hear him but can't call him on it. I should have quit and explicitly cited him as the reason why. Story 9. All the questions regarding pregnancy, babies, kids, family are a no-no in Spain. My wife went once, and the first question was, "Are you going to get pregnant soon?" She was brought into these awful family company. She worked for 3 months before quitting. She was basic all day on his desk, acting like Pottert. Not even once she signed a document, did a project or anything. My wife tried to quit the first week because she was literally doing nothing all day long and seeing we are good on money. I told her to quit and look for another job. When she tried to quit, the owner offered her more money, and she replied, "The problem isn't the money. She is doing nothing." For someone so used to manipulate people with money, he was pissed off. After it was one disappointment after the other. One of the worst ones was when they were reviewing CV, and the boss told the wife to hire these new guy because he looked in need, but not hired him as a way of helping him just because he is needed. I can do with you whatever I want. The last straw was when my wife needed a day off to do a few bureaucracy things. He said, "No one has taken a day off in this company in 20 years. She waited it out a few days and quitted the next week. Their looks acting surprised because they cannot fan thumb someone being paid for doing nothing all day long. Story 10. If the employer refuses to give you an actual range for salary, saying crap like it's competitive and we are in line with the current market doesn't help me do the math to know if I'm going to make enough to put a roof over my head or food on my table. Quit wasting my time and tell me what the position pays, you colossal asshat. Story 11. One place couldn't tell what my job title would be. They seemed offended that I would want some sort of title, as in, "We all chip in here." I then looked at their cards they gave me and asked about the titles on their cards. Lots of non-answers. Basically, they needed some sort of office grunt to do whatever they needed and couldn't begin to articulate what that might be. Story 12. In an office environment, if the coffee isn't free, and I don't even drink coffee, it means that either Dash Management's discretionary spending budget is not large enough to cover coffee. Management is not really management in this situation. I don't want to work for a not manager because a not manager cannot do anything. They won't spend the money because they can't measure the obvious increase in productivity. An environment where every single dollar must be justified with hard facts is not an environment that I want to work in. Sometimes money needs to be spent more easily. They won't spend the money because it is literally offensive to them to spend money on employee happiness. We have an employee-covered coffee system that works on the honor system. Everyone pays $1 per cup for upkeep, but the company supplies the space and donates special coffee during holidays. The machines are Keurig, and there are several flavors, and the amaretto is really good. And the employee of the month gets to choose one of the flavors for the month. Isn't that fun? Is the epitome of corporate BS that I do not want to be around. Story 13. I went into an interview during COVID, and the first thing the hiring manager said was, "Oh, you don't need that silly mask here." First red flag. Second red flag was when I asked if there was any training or a training manual that came with the machine I was supposed to use but was never trained on it. The response when questioned was, "Yeah, you're just going to have to figure it out. There's only 2 of this machine in our city, and the guy who operates the other one is 80 and retiring soon." Third red flag was when I asked about benefits, and the hiring manager said, "We don't believe in benefits for working. The paycheck is the benefit." I ended the interview then and there and said, "Yeah, no, this seems super sketchy, and I've had a bad feeling the second I showed up. No thanks, I'll find employment elsewhere." As far as I know, the building got condemned for structural integrity issues. The company went bankrupt maybe 3 weeks after my interview, and the owner got charged with negligence or something since no one that worked there was actually licensed or properly trained on any machinery. Story 14. For me, it's if the hiring manager's overbearing, not even in a mean way. For example, I accepted an offer with 3 weeks' notice so that I could give notice to my current employer. The hiring manager called me multiple times in that 3-week period to ask how I was doing and if I needed anything, one of which from the hospital. It seemed nice at the time, but realized that it was more of a control move. His management style was micromanagement under the guise of being supportive. Incredibly toxic work environment with unrealistic standards, severely understaffed, expectations of long hours, etc. I knew I wasn't crazy after one of the people that started after me was gone within a couple of weeks. I made it 6 months. I resigned without notice for the first time in my career with an email. My boss was out of office, but within literally minutes of resigning, he was calling me wondering why I was leaving. It's been 9 months, and it was the best career decision I've made so far. Story 15. I applied for a job, and the CEO stops the CIO halfway and goes, "No, wait, I think you'd be better doing something else." Then asked me to create the job role for them and what it'd require to do, then ghosted. Hiring manager was very polite and apologetic, though. This was also after another red flag, pushing my interview out for weeks because he didn't have time. Or with some payroll company, Paychex I think, randomly tells me the job is management, was not listed as such, and I had no experience. And I'd be reporting to the CFO. Sure, but now my skills don't align. Or asking for free work without the user's knowledge. Create a marketing and sales strategy for these actual companies. Here's all their metrics. No NDA or anything. Randomly telling you to come up with a new role you didn't apply to. Randomly changing the scope and responsibilities of a role. Violating client trust and asking for free work. Story 16. High rate of staff turnover, the whole family nonsense. Anywhere that asks you to do a trial shift or something there and then and hasn't given you any kind of advance notice, they'd expect you to work and with no expectation of paying you. Unless you're applying for an executive position, then anywhere that has an overly complicated and drawn-out hiring process of 3 or 4 or more, interviews with an element of work or presentation in your own time. Oh, and no salary range spoken about, or even no salary talk at all. Or they get offended when you ask the perfectly reasonable question of what salary you could expect if offered the role. Interviews are supposed to be a two-way street. You are perfectly entitled as the interviewee to ask about compensation, holiday, vacation time, and benefits. That's the whole point of a job. You want me to do X, and in return I expect to be compensated at a fair and reasonable rate. Story 17. I applied for a tech job at an aquatic Orlando theme park. The interviewer and another lead tech just asked the standard HR textbook questions, which I was ready for. But never once did they ask me any tech-related question. It would be like interviewing a car mechanic, and instead of asking them, "So the car won't start, what do?" You ask them to name an animal they compare themselves to. Or how would you handle an angry guest and the steps you would take to de-escalate? It was almost like they grabbed the wrong set of interview questions and gave me a customer service or a park employee one, not a fixing things tech job one. They never even bothered to ask about my past experience. It was a very sterile and odd interview. At a certain point, I just gave up and couldn't wait to get out of the interview. Again, very sterile and odd interview. Story 18. They tell you they are going to start training you in a related position because everyone who works in job you applied for is also trained in related position. They are trying to get people for that position instead of the one you applied for. This happened to me at a local gas station / liquor store / pizza place. I applied to be cashier for the liquor store. They said I needed to train in the kitchen first. I did, and when my training in the kitchen was up, I asked when I would be trained in for the liquor store. They said they didn't need anyone for that position. It was full. Sad part is, it's not false advertising because they really do have people trained in on all stations, but they are using the promise of an easier job to fill a position nobody would apply for if they advertised it alone. Story 19. Any of the following. We are a family here. Run. We wear multiple hats. Understaffed or no clear line of responsibility. We pay a lot of attention to details. Our leaders are hands-on and involved. Micromanagement. We are looking for a cross-functional talent. Hiring manager have no idea what they want. We want someone who's extremely passionate and won't stop until the job is done. Long hours. Story 20. I've learned that if they talk bad about the previous person in your position, it's likely a problem with the company, not the last employee. It means they have unachievably high expectations on the job role, and they think the grass is always greener. Now, I've been in a good job where after approximately 3 months, they let on that the person before me had some problems. But if you're hearing complaints in the interview process, run. Even if not in the interview, but in the first week, run. Advice to all interviewees is to never talk bad about previous employers in the interview because it makes you look like a bitter, discontented complainer. Well, same should go for employers. It's very, all my exes are crazy. Like, maybe you're the crazy one. Story 21. 1. Hiring manager rescheduling interview at the very last minute. This means there's a risk that they might not be an available or collaborative manager, and anything you need will be deferred while they go off to their 378th meeting and then forgotten about. 2. Lots of people doomily say, 6 months here, wow, that's veteran status. I worked for a dreadfully disorganized startup hothouse that ended up being exactly as nightmarish as these warnings said it was. But the pay was great, which is why I didn't leave after the first 2 months like I should have done. 3. Any rudeness, performative alpha bullcrap, or frostiness. After my experience earning a ton of money somewhere pretty rank, friendliness matters much more to me than remuneration does. Story 22. I once interviewed with a large manufacturer of insulated drink mugs and was asked, "Are you able to not take any insults and criticism from the owner personally? He occasionally involves himself with projects at the last minute and may end or throw out work on a whim, and you will need to be okay with that and not take it personally." So you mean being subject to regular verbal abuse is part of the job? I wouldn't call it abuse. Thanks for your time, but I'll pass. Story 23. I got an email after a text conversation with someone about an application. I've been applying to basically anything and everything. And the email was very cookie cutter, and in the beginning of it, it actually had here at company name, like straight up fill in the blank that they couldn't even fill out properly. I tried to look up the company and found a few scams that they are not accredited and enough complaints that I texted back that I was no longer interested in why. Getting texts back from someone asking to call me, but I just blocked the number. If they're that desperate for workers and have that many red flags, they're clearly not the company for me. Story 24. Way too many people in the interview room. Should be two max. They seem desperate. I once got an offer for a senior position within 30 minutes of an initial Teams chat with two people who didn't even work in the department I'd be in. I turned them down. Kind of niche but racist dog whistles. I once interviewed at a place where the hiring manager wouldn't stop dropping in comments about Brexit, immigrants, and British jobs for British people. I mean, I'm glad she did, because it gave me a bullet to dodge. I'd have been pissed if that only came up after I started working there. Story 25. When you ask to get a brief description of the workday in terms like anything else the customer requires or whatever else is necessary to complete the requirements, or my personal favorite, anything the client requests, not limited to the posted job description. Those types of catch-all statements are illegal in government contract work now. But a few years ago, those statements were guaranteed to duck any salaried employee into doing all kinds of nonsense far outside the scope of position. It also indicates a one-way mentality through the chain of command, which is not only inefficient, but proven to be more negative than positive in terms of dynamics and output. Story 26. It was a tech company with really strong Dilbert vibes. The last interview of the day was with a contractor who was a tech lead in the area I would be working. In the interview, he said, "There's really a lot of bullcrap going on here." I didn't know how to react, so I laughed awkwardly and said I saw there wasn't a no bullcrap sign on the front door. He leaned over the table, grabbed my hand, and hissed in my face, "No, I mean there is really a lot of bullcrap." That wasn't the only red flag, but I've never seen a bigger one. Story 27. Online, they posted how much they were paying. Then the interviewer told me they actually paid far less. I was already thinking no. I had a super crappy job and wanted out, but did the tour of where I'd be working anyway. The guy who would have been my supervisor wouldn't look me in the eye, didn't shake my hand or say anything to me. An older guy came up to the supervisor and loudly asked, "Who's this?" The supervisor said, "I don't know, I guess the interviewer, wants to hire him." I declined the job and the company went under a couple of years later. Story 28. Interview loop. This means they're a crafty company that thinks they're a FANG company and are going to waste your time with 5+ meaningless interviews with people who have no business conducting an interview before denying you the position because you're not the unicorn they're looking for. Story 29. Have a buddy that just interviewed, and the person arranging it mentioned he needed to wear a suit and tie because we're that sort of company, which is fine. The scary part is he got offered the job, and when talking to the guy making the offer, they kept commenting on his tie and shoes. They mentioned the last guy was fired for not wearing a tie to an outside business meeting. Now, I have absolutely no problem being suited and booted for an interview, and for a job in general, but firing someone over a tie? Story 30. Got asked if I had a partner when I queried why. It was explained, people with partners don't work as hard as they want to go home constantly and spend time with them. What? Also, where I'm from. It's illegal to ask. Another place I asked about WF, I wasn't fussed either way, but the woman got up from her chair and pretty much yelled at me in my face that wasn't an option. Glad I never got that job. Story 31. The last person couldn't be found after going on a month-long crack bender. It was an it job and total ducking bullcrap. I developed a drinking problem trying to cope through the insanity. Story 32. I had a phone interview a while ago. I asked the recruiter what the culture was like and how they liked their job. They were a remote FH position, so they couldn't answer it. The position I was applying for was in office. They also told me that even though I have a bachelor's degree in that field and 3+ years of experience, that none of it counted and they would only give me the very bottom number of what was offered. It was way too low. I didn't take it. Story 33. I was on the final leg of the interview process. They seemed to want to hire me, L over my credentials, etc. But then they said I would have to meet my wife and I over dinner. Small family place. I get it. but I was super uncomfortable with the idea. I like to have a strong wall between work life and home life, and it just felt like they wanted to see if I was the right type of guy. Story 34. When I was applying to my first job right off graduating grad school, I was very intentional with asking questions in regards to how employers support new grads. One of the hospital I applied to, the manager responded by provided me the names of the chain of command of the hospital, and I had asked them about how they support new grads. Very thankful for the job offer, but I very quickly declined. I was honestly just looking for something simple, like we listen. The story 35. When there's a difference in the salary the headhunter quoted you and the salary the individual interviewer is offering. If the company is that disorganized, imagine what working there would be like. Story 36. 31 minutes, was asked to come in for a technical sales interview. The interviewer, mid-30s female, spent 20 minutes asking about my personal life, if I was married, how I'd spend my weekend, preferences for music, how often I work out, and then proceeded to get up to the whiteboard and bend over to adjust the stand. She texted me the day later. We slept twice, but never heard back after. Got rejected by HR the following week. Safe to say I didn't get the job. Story 37. I once had a hiring manager tell me 3 or 4 times during the interview that all new hires are on a 90-day probation where they can't call in. I thought it was odd that she just kept saying it, but then I got the job and it was awful from the top down. Going in day after day was hell. I should have known that her repeating it over and over just meant that they can even keep people for 3 months is story 38. Anything that reads along the lines of, the CEO director likes to get involved with things all the time, is that going to be a problem for you? This is code for management. Ducks things up all the time and without warning. Are you prepared for last-minute overtime and changing goalposts? Because you're going to spend more of your time on this person's fantasy projects than you are on your job, and they're going to be the worst part of working here. Story 39. When they ask you to put you work at their company, on your LinkedIn even before signing the contract. This was a globally recognized consulting firm that wanted to show their client that they had the right team with prior experience in the client's domain. I declined the request LinkedIn, but had to take the role due to desperation despite it being a red flag. Ended up resigning a few weeks later due to extreme micromanagement from the leadership among other dysfunctions. Story 40. They mention a fast-paced work environment with tight deadlines and guaranteed overtime. I read in another thread that was code word for understaffed. Saw a job description like that for a graphic design position at a funeral home. Read the employee reviews and learned the places was severely understaffed, and the overtime came from not being able to meet deadlines on time. I've seen the same job post a few times over the past year, so I'm thinking they can't keep their employees. Story 41. I had a 2-year-old pick up a large toy, a plastic folding mountain that you could keep toy cars in, and chuck it at my head while observing the classroom I was interviewing for. I dodged it because not my first rodeo. Then, when asking about benefits, was told by the director in a somewhat surprised tone like she wasn't expecting the question, "We are hoping to get those set up very soon." I did not accept their offer. Story 42. What about the interviewer being late? I've had 2 occasions where the first was nearly 15 minutes late without apologizing, just walked past me to enter the interview room and expected me to follow without saying anything. The second, with a different company, was nearly half an hour late, with apologies because the room was hosting a small conference. The guy from the first one clearly had an ego throughout the interview. Story 43. A family-owned company means some of the employees are there because of their last name rather than skill or commitment. They also tend to be fireproof. I did that for 15 years with a startup. As soon as his sons came of age, I was tossed aside after a few years of cleaning up his son's messes. Story 44. When you do the first interview and they start talking about your onboarding and company culture and never actually mention what it is that you'll be doing while being almost impossibly vague or generic about everything else. Bonus points if they talk about how flexible all of the work is without explaining what specifically the work is about. And shortly after that discussion, you get an offer letter without having ever met who you'll be working under. Story 45. If they want you to do a trial shift that is unpaid, bonus points is if that trial is more than a day. If they demand you to do tasks that are not part of your work position. If they do not pay you for working overtime, yet expect you to work overtime. We are a family at this workplace. You get a break if there is time for one. Workers here get no breaks. Story 46. If the interview is so structured, you feel like cattle being run through a chute. I had one company advertise one thing and respond to my resume with an extremely detailed set of instructions, including orders to not come early. The interview was extremely sketchy and turned out to be selling Temu gizmos on the side of the road. On my way out, I saw a girl being herded in the same way I was. Story 47. They gather a bunch of interviewees in a room and start a sales pitch. I wish I was less polite and hadn't wasted 45 minutes of my life only to learn that they wanted us to start a commission-only sales role. One of the guys trying to convince us to join also mentioned that he never sees his son awake unless the son stays up past his bedtime, which is just sad. Story 48. I once joined a job interview with multiple back-to-back mini one-to-one interviews with different people for a US-based scale-up. One guy who would have actually been reporting to me if I took the job seemed stressed out of his mind and said, "You need to tell the SVP we can't do what they're asking." I realized pretty quick that this was not going to be a great place to work. Story 49 told me, "If you're ill for more than 7 days, you will have to leave the staff accommodation and find somewhere else." Yeah, hell no. No surprise they missed and read ignored the email clarifying this, but responded to my email declining the interview pretty much quickly to the same inbox. Also, if the recruiter doesn't seem to know anything about the job, like, do you work for the company or not? Story 50. TBH, I'd say panel interviews, like 3 people interviewing 1 person, but they seem to remain so ubiquitous that there's almost no point seeing them as a red flag. They're a terrible way to interview anyone for anything, though. And at least one of the panel is always there as some internal political gesture. Internal politics, that is. Like they feel they don't get enough say otherwise, or something like that. Story 51. I know I'm not supposed to ask this, but I had someone ask about my kids because I had some drawing hanging up behind me. It was innocent and fine, but caught me off guard. That wasn't the issue. What I found out later was a theme of how they ran their team. They knew they shouldn't, but they did anyway. Not a good thing. Story 52. When I asked the interviewer, computer chip manufacturer, what their typical day looks like, and I realized the company is poor and trying to save money by not having vendor service contracts or buying spare parts for their ancient, decrepit tools, didn't quite run out the door, but close. Story 53. Bait and switch job interviews. Asking you what your salary expectation is and then not telling you what they want to pay. It means they're going to lowball you. What is one thing you would change about where you currently work/have worked? They're not looking for your ideas. They want to see if you complain about something similar that also occurs there. Story 54. Applied for a receptionist job at an insurance agency. Set up a time to chat on the phone before doing an in-person interview. On the phone, I'm told the location of the job isn't in the greater city area. It's 30 minutes away, and it's to be an insurance agent, not a receptionist, but they weren't getting a lot of hits with that listing. Story 55. We can't afford to pay you that much, but you'll make it up with the end-of-year bonus. As others have said, we are a family. My son is the vice president. He used to be in real estate before he joined us, in a technical role for which he has no background. Story 56. When they start focusing on the social aspects of why the job is so great, rather than what the job actually is. If they can't clearly articulate the job to me but try and sell me on the staff love the Christmas/summer party, etc. To me, if that's the focus, it's like a used car salesman trying to offload junk. Story 57. Openly rude and abrasive off the bat, they openly ask who you voted for in the last election. Lasted 6 days and just left. I never even went back for my last check. The job description has changed once you're in the interview. The boss, HR, anyone there is very uniformed of what you exactly do for them. Story 58. We want people who want to be part of building something. This is a synonym for we are all family here, and we don't want people only motivated by money. This just means the pay and benefits are poor, and they want a lot of work out of you, and your responsibilities will grow without your compensation growing. Story 59. It's a small business, and the only person working there is the one interviewing you. Usually means you'll be micromanaged to hell. Similarly, it's a big store business, where you'll be expected to sell stuff, but there are absolutely no customers during normal business hours. Story 60. I had a job interview where I was asked to provide reasons to them why I left my previous employer, kept on baiting me saying they were likely a crap employer, which I found completely unprofessional. Needless to say, it would have been a toxic environment to work under if I had been hired, so I dodged a bullet. Story 61. Company people hired to work in a specialized environment without specialized training. They'll hire 2 people, pay them less than the one they need, then complain about this. Workers are barely functioning. There's a knife fight between 2 people that don't have the capacity to admit they're wrong, and Har might show up with a touching doll. Story 62. This one is specific to one situation, but when one of your future managers has a mullet. I almost balked at taking the job because of him, but the main boss was cool. Alas, she got fired and replaced by Mullet Man, who didn't last very long in the top spot. Story 63. Interviewer's final question was, "Are you ready to drink from the fire hose?" with a sly smirk. I called the recruiter the next day and said thanks, but no thanks. Story 64. I once interviewed for a VP level role at a construction company. The 2 guys interviewing me were visibly stressed out and commenting how involved and demanding the owners were. I called the recruiter and pulled my name out of consideration the second I was outside the building. Story 65, when they ask if you'd need a 2-week notice, and probably are more accustomed to employees walking with no notice than quitting with notice. Story 66, any iteration of, we need someone who can work well under pressure in a fast-paced environment. It's pretty much always code for, we want someone who can do the work of 3 people for the pay of 1, little to no support will be available, and this place is a disorganized, chaotic crap show. Story 67. I had one pharma company straight up tell me that they will work me like a dog. They then proceeded to offer me a position 1 grade level lower than I applied for and interviewed for, with the opportunity to be promoted in the next 6 months. Story 68. Job interview went well. Seemed like a good sales gig and they liked me. On the way out, a guy who worked there warned me not to take it, that the turnaround was horrid and I would just get blamed for their problems. Thanks for the tip, guy. Story 69, they add extra qualifications or requirements that weren't in the job advertisement. No, I don't have a heavy truck license. Why would I need one for an admin job in a community center? They ran bus outings at times and wanted someone who could drive the bus. Story 70, I had one literally ask, what is the very lowest amount you'd accept for a salary? This one also notably insisted on escorting me to the restroom and waiting outside. This wasn't some high security gig. It was particularly unimpressive contract research testing company Story 71, being asked how you feel about an occasional work weekend for a 9-to-5 MF job, was approached about a manager position internally. Interviewed, didn't get the job, for a team was, still is, understaffed, has high turnover, bad processes, bad workflow management, and a high stress area. Story 72, mandatory arbitration that the company can override with their own policy, i.e., the company can ignore the arbitrator. Mandatory clauses violate state laws. Clauses prohibit you from reporting safety, wage, or any forms of discrimination. These were 3 separate companies and my last interviews. Story 73. We're a family here. No, you're a company, and no matter how much you pay me, I have as much loyalty to you as you have to me. None. I've ditched members and parts of my family. I will happily do it to a company. Story 74. I had several at once, wrongly accusing people of being late, not listening to them, interrupting the interview to do some work or talk to other applicants, telling applicants that the job can be done by basically everybody and offering a ridiculously low sum of money. Story 75. They barely ask you any questions, seem really enthusiastic, and give you the offer on the spot or that day. It's too good to be true. They have a big problem internally and want to hire new bodies to throw at it as soon as possible. Story 76. I learned low base, no commission cap is code for we won't pay you well whenever we can avoid it, and specifically distinctiveness, good service, and we are a family means expect DVBE. Story 77, I was in my 20s and the guy I was interviewing with wouldn't make eye contact with me and then was rubbing his you-know-what the whole time. People who worked there told me not to work there on my way in and out. Story 78. What about when the interviewer employer forgot his interview? He scheduled an interview with me a month ago, and when I went over to the workplace, I was told he left home early. Don't worry, I am not working at the place anymore. Story 79, when they brag about turnover, when they boast about paying your dues, when you have to get the job through a temp agency, when they brag about how hard it is to work there. Story 80, if they're looking for someone with a good sense of humor and can handle a joke. This just means that you will hear a lot of really offensive language, and they don't want you to complain about it. Story 81, the interview was a normal amount of time with reasonable questions, but at the end they assigned me homework to return in a week. They wanted me to write a draft strategic plan for the company. They called it try before they buy. Story 82, I can't remember the exact words, but I had an interview once where they really kept pushing me about how I handled difficult people. I was disappointed I didn't get the job, but looking back, I think I dodged a bullet. Story 83, had an interview in a government building. I'd driven past it to my previous job for like a year and a half watching the renovations start and complete. Mid-interview, the power flickered. I asked if that was normal. They said yes. Story 84. We've never had anyone quit. This is code for we fire them before they have a chance to leave. It's exactly like someone telling you they've never been dumped and for the same basic reason. Story 85. When the posting says some OT and in the interview they say they've been working mandatory Saturdays for a few months. You know, because they are short-staffed and you joining will surely be enough to get back on track. Story 86. So many things. Refusing to discuss compensation, turnover, or why the last person left are my top ones. To me, this usually indicates once you're in too deep, you'll discover those things they didn't want you to know at the beginning. Story 87. The interviewer being late, especially when they advertise for punctuality and reliability. I walked out of an interview twice because of this. I despise people and organizations who live by the do as I say, Not as I do standard. Story 88. Personality tests. Only people there are under 3 years or soon-to-be retirees waiting it out. Our salaries are competitive. With who? McDonald's. Won't tell the salary until after your own out-of-pocket employee testing was done. Story 89. When they know you're going through a divorce and tell you that crackers are a family food. Happy families. Maybe single people eat crackers. We don't know, and frankly, we don't want to know. Story 90. I had an interviewer ask me, is salary important? I hated that I had an acceptable reply to that, but I needed a job. Fortunately, they went for someone else, and I now have a better job lined up. Story 91. The questions aren't matching the description of the role, e.g. You applied for a senior role and are being asked how you handle difficult customers, or you are asked what you do for fun in your spare time. Run. Story 92. I've had some weird ones over the years. The interviewer asked, how old are your children? And then proceeded to denigrate me for not having a spouse or kids. Suffice it to say that was a job opportunity. Story 93. An old colleague was flown from the UK to the US for an interview at FB. In the interview, they asked him, how do you cope working in a shark pool? He politely declined continuing the process. Story 94. When accepting a job from Theranos, yes, that Theranos, my hiring manager told my current manager he was stealing one of his team via a Facebook post. I did not end up taking that job, thankfully. Story 95. My favorite question to ask the interviewing team. What do you like about working for company? Watch their face and it will be a total giveaway. Listen to their answer. Is it canned or sincere? Story 96. I once had an interviewer, GC for commercial properties, ask me if I had a wife, girlfriend, kid, or if I was planning on it in the near future. I knew instantly they were planning on working me to death. Story 97. We're like a family here. There's a reason why I don't talk to my family. Story 98. During a COVID lockdown, I got offered a job without even being interviewed. Then they told me it's in person 5 days a week, even though it was banned by the government in my province. Story 99. 4 words. Work hard, play hard. If your interviewer drops that, run. They will understaff, overwork, expect you to be grateful for the opportunity, and invite you to drink with your rowdy, alcoholic coworkers. Story 100. If it's a retail store that is constantly changing its hours and or isn't open half the time when they say they are, that's a big red flag. I'm looking at you, Walgreens. What is the biggest mistake you've made in a job interview? Story 1. Interviewed at a bank. Was going perfectly despite how nervous I was, and I was probably in with a great chance. Then as a final question, the panel asked me, why should we hire you? And I word vomit replied, because I probably won't steal your money. I was not hired. Story 2. It was a silly server position, but during the interview, the guy asks, do you smoke? My 20-year-old stoner brain responds, cigarettes? No. I didn't get that one. Story 3. Did not prepare for the what are 3 things you can improve on skill-wise question. Job was to work with disabled kids. I said I could improve my patience, not my timeliness, not my communication, not my team-building skills, patience. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Story 4. Attending in the first place. At the end of an IMO productive 2-hour interview for a position I was well qualified to take, the most arrogant of the 3 interviewers revealed that the job they would be offering me was actually 2 levels down from the one for which I had applied, at a little over half the salary. He did so without the least hint of embarrassment, basically indicating the company made a regular habit of deliberately deceiving their prospective hires. I didn't say anything. I simply gathered my resumes, quite literally, yanking one out of the hand of one interviewer, put them in my portfolio, and walked out. Story 5. Not exactly a mistake, but I went to the counter of the store and asked if they were hiring. They said they were and gave me an on-the-spot interview right there in the middle of the store, with my mom standing right with me. I was 16 and she had given me a ride to the store. My mom proceeded to answer every question for me and kept talking me up. I ended up getting the job and worked there for over 2 years, so thanks, Mom. Story 6. I was interviewed once to sell an allergy medication, Pharma. It was a launch of a twice-daily rival to getting allergy shots, which are monthly. Interview was going well, and I get asked, do you have any questions for us? See, I do homework, and when this comes up, I ask real questions, as I don't want to get stuck working somewhere I don't like. So Product X is a twice-daily product, costs the patient more than shots, nets the doctor less money per visit, and has about the same efficacy. What is your current strategy or vision in successfully getting this into the market and well adopted? Needless to say, the director did not like my question and just said, well, that's where you'd come into play. I wasn't offered the job. It's okay because after that answer, I didn't want it anyway. Story 7. Accepting the job when they offered it right on the spot. I didn't know at the time, but that's usually not a good sign. They're usually either desperate or the job just sucks. Story 8. Went negative and badmouthed my current at the time company. Apparently that's a huge no-no. You should always make it sound like you want to go to the new company and not escape a bad one. Story 9. My interview was at 6 in the evening. The interview was at a coffee shop right across from the business. The owners were going to close up for the day, then meet me at the coffee shop for the interview. I got there early, but since I didn't want to loiter, I bought a coffee so I could sit at a table to wait for them. They eventually showed up maybe 15 minutes late. I never noticed until that day. But I'm pretty sensitive to caffeine, so by the time they showed up, I was a little too high energy. I was rambling a lot more than I needed to. In the moment, I thought I was doing well, but it wasn't until afterward that I realized I probably should have ordered a tea or something. I didn't get the job. Story 10. My first job interview was a bullcrap group interview, and they were asking a bunch of questions related to pop culture and movies I hadn't seen because at the time I lived a fairly sheltered life. They then asked what our favorite animal was, and I knew I had to say something to stand out from everyone else. So when it came to me, I just blurted out flamingo, since I thought that would be a unique animal that no one would think of, but didn't think far enough ahead to actually justify why it was my favorite animal, and so completely blanked on the follow-up question. Pretty sure I came across as a raving lunatic. Story 11. Interviewer. What's your biggest weakness? Me, Mr. Funnyman. Bullet's panel of interviewers give me concerned looks and stare in silence for a good 10 seconds. I got the job, been here for 13 years, but man, that was brutal. They said that they didn't get the joke at first and assumed I misheard the question and were giving me time to re-answer. After I left the interview, they were going over everything and then realized that I meant being shot as my weakness, and they all laughed. Story 12. I was dead asleep when a hospital supervisor called me for a transport position. Being half asleep, I answered like it was a driver position in the middle of the interview. He stops me mid-interview like, you know this is an internal position, right? You move patients in-house. I apologized and mentioned I worked third shift and just got to sleep and asked him if we could redo the interview. He laughed and said he had time. I was hired a week later, and he picked at me, jokingly, for a couple months about it. Story 13. Went for an interview at a local movie rental store. Completely blanked when I was asked what movies I've watched recently. Ended up throwing out Cheech and Chong after a way too long and awkward delay, then nervously laughed like a stoner. Story 14. I was interviewing for my first ET job. This was a massive deal for me. Higher pay in a field I love and get me out of the hellhole of destroying my body for a wage. This was also an internal job posting, so my time with the company was a plus. However, I had zero experience in it besides my general knowledge and self-taught experience. In this job, I work a shift rotation of nights and days, 12-hour shifts. The first day of nights is always the hardest because I just never get a good sleep, which is Monday night, so I get off 7 a.m. Tuesday morning. Well, Monday afternoon, I get a message asking what shift I'm working so they can interview me. I tell him, and he asked if I would like to come down first thing 7 a.m. Tuesday morning. I was so stoked, I immediately agreed without thinking about it. Cue first night, barely make it through, riding on about 3 hours of sleep, par for the course. But since I'm always moving, it's usually not too bad. Finish my shift and go to the interview, ready to go. Then I sit down in a nice comfy office chair that reclines, with ice-cold AC running and dimmed office lights. I became barely coherent. So they come in to start the interview. The only 3 IT people in the plant. They were hiring 4 IT troubleshooters to have 1 on each shift. The manager, the hardware guy, and the network guy. I muddle through best I can until right in the middle of answering a question, I completely forgot what I was saying or what the question even was. They just stood there staring at me like I was some sort of amorphous blob waiting for me to do something interesting. I apologized, told them I was foggy from lack of sleep, and we moved on. I was certain I bombed the interview and didn't get the job. I dwelled on it for weeks as I had yet to hear anything back. I still got the job. I asked the guys later about it, and they thought it was ducking hilarious. Story 15. Not an interview, but in high school, 2016 I think, I got auto-rejected from a clothes retailer. I want to say it was because I put strongly disagree to I am a people person. Didn't make that mistake again when I started applying to actually important jobs. Story 16. It was during college when I was living at home about 40 miles outside of Boston. I was working during a co-op with about an hour commute if things went my way, not in Boston. A friend of mine got a job inside Boston, right near Charles River, making 60% more than me per hour. I asked if they were hiring, and he said yes, getting me an interview. I told my boss at the time, and she said I should definitely go on the interview. It took me 2 hours to get there for the interview. I was displeased to say the least. It wasn't even peak traffic time, it was something like for 1 p.m. Somehow I was still early. They called me in to start the interview early. My phone rang. I put my finger up to the person interviewing me to wait a moment and answered. It was my father asking if I'd gotten there okay. I said yes, that I was in the interview already. He said I probably should get back to it then, and we hung up. The person interviewing me just sat there staring at me. Surprised I'd answered my phone. Went back to my current job the next day, and my boss asked how it went. I told her it went great. She said to let her know if they offered it to me and not to accept anything without talking to her again. About 2 weeks later, my boss's boss at the time called me into her office. She said she heard I was offered another job at 60% more. They decided to give me the same increased pay and retroactively pay me back to the first of the year. It was the start of February. I immediately accepted this. I ended up being really competent at that job considering I was an intern. Was told I was better than some of their seasoned devs as my code was nowhere near as buggy. Another week later, the company I'd interviewed with called asking why I hadn't called about the job and if I were still interested. I said no thanks, the commute was too much. I guess the mistake I see here is answering my phone. I don't think I would do that again, as I value interview experience these days, even for jobs I have no intention of taking. Story 17. I landed an interview with Moog Inc. I sailed through the questions about my past work experience, how I deal with problems, etc. Then, the interviewers asked me what I knew about the company. I said, "Oh, I know about Moog synthesizers. Moog Inc. has nothing to do with Moog music synthesizers. They make precision controls for things like planes and rockets." In my own defense, this happened in 1980, before everybody had personal computers. So researching a company was a little more difficult than it is now and would have involved a trip to the library. Still, I should have done my homework about the company, and I didn't. Anyway, things turned out okay. I didn't get the job, of course, but the interviewers were very nice. The company flew me out for the day, treated me to lunch, and gave me money for my expenses. I ended up with more money than I started with, and I learned a valuable lesson. Story 18. I had interviews at McDonald's and Popeyes. Both places didn't even bother actually asking me questions to see what kind of employee I might be. They just immediately shoved onboarding papers into my hand and informed me when my first day was, both of them telling me it was, specifically scheduled for the one day each week that I was entirely unavailable. The Popeyes manager made a habit of verbally abusing employees, including me, in front of the district manager. And when I quit after a few days, he refused to pay me for the work I did and instantly removed access to my pay stubs somehow. He'd also lied to me about my hourly rate in the interview. He told me I was starting at $14 per hour, and when I logged into payroll during the brief window when I had access to it, I was only making $12 per hour. The manager for the McDonald's was so wildly disorganized that she couldn't even keep track of who quit and who still worked there. I went in person to quit the job after my first shift in favor of the Popeyes job, funny enough. And a few days later, she texted me asking why I hadn't been showing up for work and when I was coming back for training. I texted back reminding her that I had quit in person, and I forget what she responded with, but I remember it being very rude and huffy. I took these jobs because the job I was working at the time, and ultimately ended up sticking with, had severely cut my hours from nearly 30 a week to not even 10 a week, and both wanted to give me 30 a week at least. At the end of that summer, after I quit both the other jobs, they gave me more hours again, and I've since been upgraded to full-time with a consistent 35 hours a week. I was 20 years old at the time and had very little job experience, so I didn't really understand how interviews and jobs are actually supposed to work. Story 19. Sitting in the waiting room near reception, and this guy comes out. All cheesy, old guy with dyed hair and oversized tie, shooting gun fingers and winking. He is visibly flirting with the pretty receptionist, who is politely smiling and trying to do her job. Then, cheesy guy casually goes into the toilet, which is right next to the receptionist area, and you can hear him taking the loudest ducking crap I've ever heard. There's zero sound insulation, and I'm sitting there with the receptionist listening to this guy's ah sounds after each sloppy crap fart, as if we were caught in a Monty Python sketch scene. It's occurring to me at this point that every day this guy must be approaching the receptionist with gun fingers and a wink before subjecting her to the sounds of his morning crap. I'm trying not to laugh, but the thought of this guy shooting cheesy gun fingers and then dropping a massive turd each day keeps repeating on me. She doesn't bat an eyelid, but I'm dying of silent laughter at this point. I was like 22 years old at the time. Then I get called into the interview room and I'm clearly in a state. They ask if I'm okay and I can't hold it to myself. I tell them that you can hear when someone's taking a crap. I'm crying with laughter. And the more I tried not to laugh, the worse it got. Nobody else saw the humor in it, which made it even funnier to me. The whole interview lasted about a minute. At some point, the interviewer said they didn't think I'd be a good fit, and I agreed, stood up, and left, still laughing at what I had witnessed. I didn't get a call back. Story 20. Not asking them for my POV the questions they asked me. Example, them. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Me. What opportunities for advancement, training, growth, and pay increases are offered to new hires in their first 5 years? I do typically ask how the position became vacant. It's usually telling when your interviewer badmouths previous employees. If they don't say something avoiding and vague, or tell you someone had a baby or some other reason for leaving, and goes right into how bad the last person was, run, don't walk, the hell out of there. Story 21. About 30 years ago, I was invited to Industrial Light and Magic to interview for a new digital compositing position. They flew me out to San Francisco to the old Kerner Building complex, where my DFX Composium demo was shown to the whole team. My interviewer said it was well received and everything looked great. This was Mecca to me. Since I'd seen Star Wars, I'd dreamed of working at Elam, and here I was. At lunch, I was surrounded by the giants of VFX, and one casually asked me, "So, what can you do for us?" I blurted out, "I don't know." Dead air. No one spoke to me the rest of the lunch, and they shipped me back home. I'd absolutely blown it. I was so starstruck I couldn't think straight. I'd meant to say everything, then explain my capabilities. But alas, thus ended my dream job before it began. Postscript. I've been making award-winning VFX, 3D animation, and motion graphics for all the time since. My life is full, and I even just completed my first short film that's already been accepted into a film fest. Story 22. Interviewed at United for flight attendant. They asked something about what I thought would be the downside of job, and I said another 9/11. Immediately, everyone's face changed, and I knew I ducked up. But honestly, why was that bad? Like, that would be a bad day part of work, and I'm acknowledging that as a possibility with the job. I think they just wanted friendly, dumb smile and nod types. Story 23. My worst, I think, noticing the job description they handed me on paper was $1 per hour less than the one advertised online. I asked about that and shouldn't have said anything. Another bad one, in 2005. Forgot to turn off my phone ringer and got some automatic texts and just ignored them, embarrassed. Story 24. I asked if I should negotiate my salary to the guy interviewing. I said what I was thinking out loud. His expression still burns in my brain to this day. But I got the job, impressed the heck out of him and myself, honestly, and really enjoyed it. Had to leave sadly to help raise my grandkids after 6 months. They tried to keep me, offered more money, even a contract position working from home, way before COVID. But I had to give all of my attention to my grandkids. But yeah, that moment still embarrasses me to this day. Story 25. First job out of high school, it was for an ER tech. Think nurse's aide, but in the ER position. The interview was a group interview between myself, HR, and the Director of Emergency Services. He introduced himself to me as Dr. Charles. Through the entire interview, I, without realizing it, kept calling him Dr. Schartz. Luckily, he had a good sense of humor, as did everyone else on the panel. I thought I majorly crashed and burnt, but the following week I got a call from HR to start onboarding for the air tech position. I have to say I didn't expect things to go that way, but I'm glad they did. Story 26. I have a very narrow skill set that applies to hospital funding and social work. I've had job offers from all over the country and have a pretty solid reputation. So I interviewed with a company in the Nashville, Tennessee area. The first interview was with someone from HR who really seemed excited about my background. So they scheduled me to Zoom with someone in management. She's one of the rudest people I ever encountered. My resume was sent to her days before the interview. She picked everything I had ever done apart and insulted me on numerous occasions. She actually said, "You have never been with an employer at least 7 years." I'm sorry, but the type of work I do constantly changes with new laws and new facilities. I should have disconnected and literally told her to F herself. To this day, I feel like not putting her in her place was a mistake. Story 27. After the interviewer was finished asking questions, I said I had a few questions. She seemed surprised. So I asked if promotions are performance-based or are they based on likability. As soon as I finished, she said, "I do not believe we are a fit." I still would not change my wording. I now have a job somewhere enjoyable. So everything worked out. Story 28. Had an interview for a cabin maintenance position at one of the biggest cabin companies here in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. It was one of those stupid performance-style interviews where you work for a day's pay to see how well you perform. They do this because they have trouble keeping maintenance people. At the end of the day, they told me that I performed exceptionally and they wanted me to start the next day. Okay, cool. They then proceeded to tell me that my first week would be an on-call week, which means I had to be up and ready to go at the drip of a hat up until 1 a.m. There was a resident issue and told me that I'd need a bulletproof vest for these night calls. I walked straight to HR, grabbed my check for that day, and noped right out of there. Story 29. Not walking out the second I realized they pulled a bait and switch. We were more than halfway through the interview before the listing says X, but we're looking for Y. I sucked it up out of desperation. I should have taken literally any temp job until I was back on my feet or got temp to hire. But desperation and logic often do not go hand in hand. I found out later 2 others backed out. Then, they tried to force me to do unethical, likely illegal things. I did walk. I was in a worse place after that. Listen to your gut and know your worth, y'all. Story 30. This was in 2021, just kind of coming out of the lockdown. I was with a company but could tell my manager had it out for me, so I started interviewing. I went to a startup with a lot of momentum, and an old coworker I had a good relationship was there. It was going to be a 2-hour interview with a few managers, then the CEO. Manager interviews went great. I was feeling good. We were laughing a lot, so I was a little more goofy than usual in a professional setting. CEO walks in with a big smile. "We're laughing," he asks, where I'd like him to sit since there were a lot of chairs around the table. I jokingly tapped the table directly in front of me, basically saying he should sit in my lap. We all laughed, but he did not. Did a big eyebrow raise and sigh and sat down and flatly started conducting the interview. I looked at the other managers and they were just looking down like they were in trouble. I did my absolute best to recover, but sealed my fate the moment I tapped the table. Story 31. I know this wasn't the question, but I'm going to share a non-mistake, something surprising I did right. The interviews were held at a cafe. The people interviewing me offered to buy me a coffee and I accepted. I was later told that's the main reason they hired me. Every other person had been too nervous to say yes. Because they were in the cafe all day, taking up one of their tables, they felt like they had to keep buying coffee. They had already drank so much coffee they felt sick from it. They were so relieved and grateful that I took the cup of coffee because it meant they got to take a break from it. Story 32. They asked me at an interview why I wanted to leave my current job, and I explained that the original manager who hired me made all these promises about what the role was going to be and then quit once I got hired. And it turned out to be lies, so I'm looking again. I probably careened about them too much during the interview, but at the time I was ducking pissed. Randomly through it, one guy goes, "Oh, would their name be blah blah by any chance?" I go, "Oh yeah, how did you know?" Turns out the old manager was this hiring manager's best friend and proceeds to tell me that they are an amazing person and that I probably didn't have my story straight, which set me off to start arguing with the guy about how actually crap his friend was. It ended with me saying their company was crap and storming out, bit cringy thinking back now. I 100% did not get the job, but learned not let emotions get in the way when you're trying to get something. Story 33. I got nervous in an interview for the health and safety executive, UK OSHA, and did the whole thing in a really strong Welsh accent. Whilst I am Welsh, my accent is not really very strong. It would have been no issue, but one of the interview panel knew me and knew that wasn't my accent. I was so nervous and unprepared. It was a total shambles. Story 34. I interviewed for a job with a dream company last summer for a tax analyst role. I'm in the US and the company is Germany. I had 2 initial interviews and killed it. They send me a project and I smash that too. I get invited to present it to the team. I murder it. At this point, I'm on top of the world and I'm already planning when I can start this job. Towards the end of the interview, they ask a question related to tax and answer it well. Being an American, I try to make a silly joke along with my answer, but the hiring managers, being European, they completely took it the wrong way. I tried explaining myself, but then the hiring manager says something like, "I don't think that's something we should be discussing." After this, the last 5 minutes of the interview becomes super awkward. I get rejected the next day with no feedback that they originally promised. I still think about this every day, and I cringe harder each time. Story 35. One time I went to an interview after going to a goth club the night before. I completely forgot to clean the black nail polish off, so I tried scratching it off on the train ride there. Not a good look. The lady who interviewed me went off about all kinds of things about my appearance just from that. She really character assassinated me as hard as a complete stranger can. I was young and hungover, so I kind of put up with it. If she was going to go after me over nail polish, I bet she was far worse to other people over less. Glad I didn't get hired. Ended up getting a sweet temp job at some .com, doing utterly stupid work for decent pay. When they folded, I even got to take whatever I wanted of the now defunct office gear. I only managed a computer, no furniture. Story 36. When I was a teenager, I had a phone interview for a big box store. The man asked me something along the lines of, "How did you go above and beyond for a customer in your last position?" I was caught off guard, but I remembered there was an old blind lady that would come into the gas station I previously worked at with her service dog. So I told this man I went above and beyond by walking a blind customer out to her car. The phone went dead silent. He wrapped it up quick and, surprise, surprise, I didn't get the job. Story 37. Managed to somehow get an interview with a major film company straight out of university. Was super excited and did tons of research into the role and the studio. Interview happens and it's going great. Until towards the end, they asked me what I knew about the company. I was suddenly terrified of coming on too strong and for some reason decided to play it cool and give a really vague answer. I have no idea why I decided to play hard to get in that moment, but they were very obviously taken aback by my sudden aloofness, considering how enthusiastic and knowledgeable I was about 10 seconds ago. A couple weeks later, I got the rejection email. It was personalized, which was surprising, and they even provided feedback. They said I was great, but said I was just beaten out by someone who was more knowledgeable about the company and history. I mentally kick my face in every time I think back to that interview and what my life could have been. Ah, well. Story 38 was an extremely hot summer day in Australia, around 42 degrees. Went for a web development job interview and had to take public transport. Got the interview, though, a job agency. The train that I took didn't have any aircon, and it was packed, and it was about a 50-minute journey. Got to the job interview, I was very excited. So glad that there was air conditioning, and I was in the waiting room. Interview went really well. Answered all their questions without hesitation, and I was extremely happy with how it went. Got a call from the job agency later that day. I was declined the role on the count of BO. So, always bring deodorant. Always use antiperspiration before going to an interview. Good news is, years later, I learned that company went out of business. So it wasn't an entire loss for me. But it was embarrassing to hear story 39. I blanked when they opened with, "Tell me what you do in your free time." It was a paralegal job, and I was brand new. I had color-coded notes about the firm and my applicable skills, but I'd spent the night before in a strip club celebrating a friend's b-day. So I just panicked through a mental list of all the things I couldn't say and landed on. I have a dog. We go hiking and I swim. He just kind of flails about. I got the job, and 5 years in the legal field have taught me I could have said, "I've been supporting a friend just getting into stripping lately." Story 40. It is not a big deal, but on my job interview as a lifeguard, I didn't really drink any of the water I got. Until one of the interviewers picked up her glass and drank, I picked up my glass at the exact same time. Mid-action, I thought that looked dumb, so I kind of just held my glass like I was going to drink from it for like 5 seconds, and then I put it down without drinking any. It was not bad, but the inner pain was horrible, so awkward. I got the job. Story 41. 2 stand out to me. Interview to be an office worker at an insurance agency. Them. So why do you want to work in insurance? Me. Well, insurance is as good as anything else, I guess. The owner laughed. I ended up getting hired for some reason. Interview to work with elderly doing Alzheimer's testing. Also, I was just out of college. Them. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Me. Oh, I don't know. I'd like to buy a house, maybe have a wife by then, etc., etc. Didn't get that job. Yes, I'm on the autism spectrum, but I do well in it since they tend to ask pretty straightforward questions on skill during interviews. Story 42. I smoked some substances on the 30-minute drive to the interview to calm my nerves. It was such a poor choice. I could barely have a conversation, let alone try to sell myself. They ended it very quickly and awkwardly. They asked me what one of my best qualities for the position was, and I said my smile. I just sat there chastising myself in my head. It was a mercy. They ended it soon after that. Don't get high before an interview. Story 43. I got in a fistfight in a parking lot of a fast casual restaurant with my sister the night before. She was being the hugest Karen I can't even tell you, and chose to deal with the trauma by drinking an entire bottle of homemade wine in under 30 minutes. Then going out to the bar with friends where I proceeded to sob inconsolably in the smoking area. It was at a big chain movie rental / phone place. The interview was with a friend of mine who was assistant manager, and there was an ad on repeat for a horror movie blaring in the background, and I kept jumping at the slashing noise. I had to walk home 7 kilometers in 35-degree heat. I got the job. Story 44. I don't think it was a mistake, but it definitely directly led to not getting the job. I interviewed at a place in Portland. They had startup vibes and had 30 employees. Every single one had a beard, a flannel, tight jeans, similar bone structure, and fair skin. Everyone was between 5 feet 8 inches and 5 feet 10 inches. They were all between 20 and 30 years old. They absolutely could have all been first cousins or even siblings. No women, no race diversity, not even any cheekbone / nose ridge diversity. I made a joke about only hiring their cousin. I also did not want to be in that job at all. I would have refused any job offer after meeting the team. They didn't offer me a job, so I guess the feeling was mutual. Story 45. I was doing a second interview for an environmental specialist role or something at SeaWorld and asked a question about the orcas while they were giving me a tour of the park. Something along the lines of, "Oh, do they have more room to swim back there where we can't see?" In my mind, I was trying to actively participate in the interview and show that I'm interested in learning more about their operation, but it felt like I chose the wrong dialogue option. As soon as I asked my orca question, the interviewer's smile dropped, and he went on what felt like a 5-minute rehearsed speech on how well the orcas are treated. Needless to say, I did not make it past the second round of interview. Story 46. I was a teenager interviewing for a hot dog place. They asked what the most important thing is about their organization, and I shrugged and said, "I don't know the whiners." I didn't get the job. Story 47. I didn't know it was a multi-part back-to-back interview. I think I really aced the first part. Conversation was flowing, everyone was laughing and having a good time. By the end of the first part, I had completely worn down my battery for social interaction. And then they all stood up and told me the big boss would be in soon. I was just completely zapped and not on my game at all. Struggled with basic interview questions, didn't get a callback. Story 48. Was getting interviewed for a job at a law firm. It was a woman a little older than me. Very beautiful. She liked the interview and said it. Also said that the job was between me and another contestant. I said I liked her too. I meant it as a compliment because she was really nice and outgoing, but it must have sounded like I was hitting on her. I don't know if she took offense, but I never heard from them again, despite being explicitly told I was going to get at least an email about the results before the not intentional pickup line. Story 49. I had applied for so many jobs as this was supposed to be my first real job after uni. The first question was why I wanted this role. I went into a whole spiel about how my studies and interests aligned with it perfectly. It would be such a great fit. They let me finish and told me that wasn't the role I was interviewing for at all. I had confused it with another role I would be interviewing for the next day somewhere else. We went through the motions and finished the interview, but it threw me off so much that I knew it was all for nothing. Lesson learned though, haha, story 50. I thought I was at a different company. I did their interview, and when they asked what I knew about them, I provided all the information I read. I thought this was a construction company, and I had applied to their tech support. The guy tells me no, that they are a router company. Surprisingly, I did not get the job. I don't know how I mixed it up so bad, but I learned to double check the company I'm interviewing at. Story 51. The question was, if you're working in a group project and notice someone is slacking off or producing bad work, what do you do? I answered that I'd talk to that person first, and if that didn't help, I'd probably pick up their tasks myself and just get it done. Which was my honest answer. That's how I handle things like that. Wasn't what they were looking for. They were looking for something along the lines of, I'd tell my boss and let them help me handle it. The guy interviewing me told me so on the spot, and apparently my answer was a big no-no. Didn't get the job, but duck it. I ain't no snitch. Story 52. One of the biggest mistakes I've made in a job interview was not adequately researching the company beforehand. I failed to thoroughly research the company's background, mission, values, and recent projects. I only had a superficial understanding of what the company did. During the interview, I gave generic answers to questions about why I wanted to work there and how I could contribute to the company. My lack of specific knowledge made it obvious that I hadn't done my homework. Story 53. Turning up. A good while ago, I had my first interview in over 10 years, and I think nerves took over. It was a shambles. On the plus side, the others I've had since then have gone much better. Story 54. I had an online interview yesterday and my video froze. I told him I would leave and come back and hopefully that would fix it, but every time I closed the program and clicked on the link, I just got a blank screen saying leaving. It had been several minutes and I was worried he would think I wasn't coming back, so in my frustration I said, "What the duck is happening?" I was horrified when he said, "Have you tried leaving and rejoining?" I thought I had already disconnected and was just having trouble rejoining, but he heard me swear in frustration. Story 55. Nothing huge, but I did poorly at teacher job interviews before I was experienced. I think that like any job, you have to pretend to know what you're talking about before you actually have the job and learn. I was laid off 10 years ago after 7 years of teaching and got a job immediately because, I knew totally what to talk about. I remember someone asking me how I would deal with difficult parents, and I said, no, I love parents. I love when they are involved no matter what. My answer today would come from experience and be more honest. Story 56. Not me, but someone who interviewed at our company Context. I'm a manager and sat in during the first round of interviews for a technical position. It was a technical position, so I was asking job-specific questions me. Asks questions them, me. Repeats the question in case they didn't hear, or I got cut off by static them. Keyboard typing sounds ensue, me. And please don't Google your answers. Them, pause. Hubbing slows down but continues. Suffice to say we didn't hire them, but they've been my most memorable interviewee thus far. Story 57. I went for an interview at a car dealership. They had the huge showroom glass doors wide open when I walked in on my way to the office. My interview went surprisingly well, and I was sure I would be offered the job. Unbeknownst to me, at some point during the interview process, they had closed those giant glass doors. Imagine my surprise and theirs when I walked straight into the glass like those birds in the Windex commercials. Left a full face print and busted my lip, which was now bleeding profusely. Needless to say, they did not call me. Story 58. I broke down crying. I'd been unemployed for 4 months. Interviewed twice with a company, and the third interview was with the number 2 guy at a fairly large organization. HR calls to schedule the meeting and says, "Don't bring a resume, he has it on his desk." I show up and the first thing the guy asks is, "Where is your resume?" And then proceeds to rip me a new one for 30 minutes for wasting his time and not bringing a resume. I needed a job so bad I broke down crying and walked out. Story 59. Not asking to reschedule when the interview started 30 minutes late. One interviewer said they had to leave in 10 minutes, and another said they had to finish something and hopped behind their computer in the middle of the hour scheduled for the interview. I was desperate for a job, and they were not desperate for me to take the job, but I learned a valuable lesson. My time is valuable, and if a job interview starts like a cluster duck, I don't want the job. I also didn't get the job. Story 60. Going to the wrong building. As I went to their shop where I meet the foreman before, and not to the administration place, was there 30 minutes early and sat in the car. If I would have went in, I would have had enough time to make it to the proper building, was going to be my retirement job. Story 61. Not during, but an after duck-up. I had an interview for a chef position. Nailed it, as I ticked all the boxes and had the experience needed. Was told by the owner he would call me with a trial start date. Anyway, knew we'd contact met that day, number wasn't in contact yet. Texted new employer that I would require an ounce and I'd be there soon. Realized as soon as text was sent, looked at my mate and said, well, I don't think I'll be starting that new job, Story 62. The job was to be an assistant to dog trainers. I went in thinking that I'd nail it if I exuded pure positivity and bubbly energy. I told the interviewer I loved interacting with dogs. She asked me, so you just want this job so you can play with dogs? Without thinking, I answered yes, and she ended the interview there. I was still playing the role of being overly positive, so I didn't even realize my mistake until I was at the bus stop 5 minutes later. Story 63. I was doing fantastic at the interview. It was for an admin/sales job, and at the end of the interview, my top few shirt buttons let go and showed the panel of interviewers a whole lot of boob. Most embarrassing thing to happen, but I still got the job. Unsure if it helped or hindered my chances. Story 64. I was nervous about the interview because it would have been a pretty big wage increase from the job I was working at the time. So I took a few too many Xanax, and when the interviewer asked what I needed to work on at the job I was working now, I was a little too honest and said, tardiness. I knew right then I was not getting the job. Story 65. I was asked for a time I had to say no to somebody while applying at a bar. I told what I thought was a humorous story about a teenager asking me if I could put sun lotion on her when I worked as a server at a Vegas pool. Instead of chuckling, dude got all weird and said, oh, I bet it was tough saying no to that. Then he detected that I was grossed out by him and it all went downhill. Story 66. I was overqualified for a position in the town water treatment plant. The interviewer asked if I would attend a 3-week course on water treatment. I just graduated from college with a 2-year power engineering degree, basically a water treatment plant course, times 10. The interviewer kept arguing my degree meant nothing. I explained he was full of crap. He said I wasn't getting the job. They hired a friend of mine who I helped out as much as I could. Story 67. While I was interviewing for a job, I couldn't remember the word for fajitas. I called them, Mexican food you have to put together yourself. I didn't get the job, but at the same time, it was a blessing, as a better job at another Mexican restaurant came along a week later. Story 68. I brain farted during salary negotiation, and the number I pulled from my notes was my total compensation. My salary, health insurance, bonuses, 401k match, etc. I essentially asked for 2 times the salary cap for that position. As I was saying it, my brain did the slow-mo new. They exhaled loudly, thanked me for my time, and hung up on me. Oops. Story 69. Told the McDonald's manager about at my old job, a coworker dropped a piece of chicken on the floor in the back. I told the worker to throw it away, but she declined. I then told the assistant manager, but she just looked at me like I was stupid. I didn't get the job at McDonald's. Apparently, you're not supposed to talk crap about your previous job at job interviews. Story 70. I was 19 and an idiot applying for a job that I really wanted. They asked a question that I didn't have an answer for, but I felt pressured to come up with an answer. It was, tell us a time you made a mistake that negatively impacted your job. And I really hadn't at that point in my life. So I lied and made myself look like an incompetent dummy. Unsurprising, I did not get the job. Interviewers of Reddit. What's the worst interview you have ever conducted? Story 1. I interviewed Avril Lavigne over the phone about her second album. It was an interview for radio. I knew she was trying hard to be the Alanis Morissette songwriter kind of performer. So I launched into a series of questions about her songwriting process. Do you start with lyrics or music? Do you write on piano or guitar? Those kinds of questions. Her response was, it's just really organic. End of answer. Everything after that was nonsense and yes or no, answers to open-ended questions. It was a rough one. Super glad when it was over. Didn't air a single second of it. Story 2, easy. I was interviewing for a junior programmer position. We were looking for someone to train for a cheaper rate. Kid pretty fresh out of college shows up for the interview with his mom. Now, this is okay. Things happen sometimes. One time a girl's car was in the shop. One time it was over 100 degrees outside and dad asked if he could sit in the lobby. No big deal. But this mom insisted on going into the interview room with her son. I asked her if she planned to show up to work with him every day for his full shift. She said no, so then I told her that I was going to have to interview him alone. At this, she insisted that she go into the interview room with him, and she would not take no for an answer. So I responded with, okay, in that case, this interview is over. The kid got the biggest grin I've ever seen at seeing his mother punished for this sort of behavior. I genuinely hoped that he could finally cut the cord and make something out of his life. Story 3 had an older gentleman interview. At the end, I explained that the background check form is sent to his email, and all he has to do is go fill it out. He didn't understand this concept at all, despite me explaining it 4 times. He kept asking me where he would have to take the paperwork. I said there is no paperwork, it's just a form you fill out online, like our application, and it's all done electronically. He then asked who does it. I told him the company name, and he insisted that somehow our county would need to process the information, and how did he do that? I kept telling him, all you do is open the email, click the link, fill it out, and click submit. Boom, done. He left still confused and said he'd have someone at home explain it. Crazy enough, we did hire this guy, and when I called him to schedule his orientation, he yelled at me because the 4 p.m. class time was too late. Even though I had told him there was also a 9 a.m. morning class the next week he could attend. He still kept yelling about how no one wants to do it that late. We have lives, my day's already started, I can't interrupt my day that late. He had no concept that one. We hire people for third shift jobs or people who already have day jobs in 2. The world does not revolve around your ideal schedule. We were just hiring for very basic warehouse work, and if you pass a background, you're pretty much automatically hired. We were in peak season and desperately needed people, so we said, duck it. He's seasonal and will be gone in a month anyway, and he did apologize profusely at the end of the phone call, and didn't cause any more issues after that phone call, thank God, but I still kept my distance from him. Story 4. This is by far the weirdest interview I've ever experienced, which also made me wonder, what do you do when your interviewer is crossing the line? I was being interviewed for a graphic design position at very well-known tradie servicing company. I applied for the job the night before, and the next day around 5 p.m. I get a call from an unknown number. I thought for sure it was the company I had applied for the night before. I thought I'd answer and politely ask if I could call back tomorrow, as I had to stay back and work on an urgent job. He said he would only be 5 minutes and then he would let me get back to it. He was not during the phone interview. He discovered that I lived around the corner from where he works and asked if I could come in right now for an interview. I said it's currently 5 p.m. and even though I live around the corner, I'm currently at work, which is 1 hour away. I suggested if he didn't mind an after-hours interview, I could do the next day. He agreed after a 30-minute phone interview. I finally get off the phone and get back to work. He then proceeds to message my phone, asking a few follow-up questions, which I found weird, but went along with it and answered his follow-up questions. First red flag. The next day, I left work early in hopes of getting to this job interview on time, but then it all goes downhill. He calls me midway through me driving to his office and tells me he needs to change the meeting location to a suburb I wasn't familiar with. I informed him that if he changed the location, this would affect the time I meet him. He agreed, and I asked him to send me the new address. I figured he was doing me a favor by meeting me after hours, so I should go with it. He sends through the address, and I put it into Google Maps only to discover it was a McDonald's. Second red flag traffic was terrible that day, making it such a mission to get to this guy. After 2 hours of hell, I finally made it. Mind you, throughout all of this, he is still calling and messaging me. I let him know I've made it and go inside and wait. I'm waiting a good 10 minutes. And he finally shows up. But he isn't alone. He brought his kid to my interview at McDonald's because, sure, why the hell not? I was already weirded out by having my interview at McDonald's, and then him bringing his kid along just made it even weirder. All alarm bells are ringing at this point. I needed to get away from this guy. He tells me to stay put as he orders a Happy Meal for his kid and then proceeds to sit down in front of me, with his kid on his lap whilst his kid ate some McDonald's. It was really hard to take him seriously and answer questions as professionally as I can. He was also on his phone and taking calls during my interview, and I was just so taken aback. I find out he was actually the CEO of the company, which made it even more messed up during our interview. We find out we had a mutual friend. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it will later haunt me. He was also pretty keen to talk to my current boss, but I had told him my boss doesn't know I'm looking, but please call these references instead. The interview ends, and I'm already thinking to myself, no way am I accepting his job. I knew this guy wanted me, though, but I didn't want him. Didn't want to deal with that crazy the next day. I find out he started to call and harass our mutual friend for more information on me when I hadn't given him permission to do so, nor had I put my friend as a point of contact. This made me very uncomfortable because there was nothing stopping him from calling up my workplace and asking to speak with my boss. He does call one of my approved references, though, which was my creative director, but was actually trying to organize a deal between him and my workplace. He wanted to utilize my position to his advantage, which really pissed me off. He wanted me to work at my current job 2 days a week and then work for him 3 days a week. My creative director went along with it too, which made me more angry. Either way, I thought this guy was messed up and I declined his job offer. He then asked me to work for him on weekends and I said no. I thought that was the end of it, but no, it wasn't. He then organizes a meeting with my creative director and my boss and comes into my office. I was unfortunately the closest to the door, so would always greet people. When I saw his face, I was so bloody cold to him. I couldn't believe he crossed the line and came into my workplace, and I couldn't believe my creative director even allowed it. Either way, he became a client of ours and we all started doing work for him. Everyone referred to him as my mate, and my creative director told me, my boss knows I'm looking for a job thanks to this guy. I refused to do work for this guy because it was just so bloody weird and messed up. I felt sick to my stomach and was so stressed out. Get this, my creative director also got a bonus for getting him on board, which made me even angrier and more of a reason to leave that goddamn place. What an unethical way to get a client. He was truly a disgusting human who used me to his advantage, and I didn't even work for him. Just had an interview. Even though I've moved on since then, that really has haunted me and makes me angry that I couldn't do anything when he was being really unprofessional. Story 5. She had a pretty middle-of-the-road resume with 2 years of relevant experience. I reviewed the notes for her first interview with HR, which basically said that she was polite but nervous. I was conducting the technical interview. I started off by establishing that she had done well in the first interview to try to alleviate some of her stress. She argued with me, insisting that it had not gone well. Whatever, maybe that's how she's expressing anxiety. I moved on, trying to boost confidence by handing her a softball question. I presented a simple problem that was exactly tailored to the type of work she had been doing with a platform that I was familiar with. It was the type of problem that you would almost certainly experience multiple times if you had worked with this product for a short amount of time. She accused me for questioning her resume, which is the literal function of an interview, and refused to acknowledge the question. At that point, I offered her some coffee and stepped out to call HR legal and security. I assumed that she was a litigious predator looking to sue a company for discrimination, so we had security escort her from the building as HR observed, and legal immediately took possession of my notes and audio recording. Sure enough, she sued. Her case was dismissed, she appealed, and it was dismissed again. Then she sued me personally, and her case was dismissed. Story 6. Had a lady show up and interviewed with her child and husband. I told her she was welcome to let them sit in the lobby while we interviewed, but for some reason, she declined. So we did an entire interview while she held a toddler. Story 7. It's only happened about 3 to 4 times, I think, but the closing line of, "So when do I start?" is always the first shovel of dirt on the already nailed shut coffin. Aside from that, I often interview people in a line of work who could do a job in different countries around the Middle East, or further to our work in India/Vietnam. Often they're based in Dubai and don't want to relocate, but going through a list of positions with them and explaining why they don't quite suit that role, or that role is hard. Often they're good, but they turn very, 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 very bad instantly when they start arguing that they can do a job. One in particular told me he had lots of high-rise, luxury residential, hotel project experience. He'd done a 12-story Premier Inn hotel. I said that's great and good experience, but it's not what we need for that role. And the client, who is paying for our services, expects super luxury and super tall experience. Think 5 to 7 star quality and 60+ stories. It's not easy when people are desperate to keep saying no or to keep arguing. That one in particular was awful because he was a decent bloke with a decent CV, but just not right for what we had at the time. Arguing, begging, and pleading just makes you want to leave the room. Story 8. I was a recruiter at an agency and had a candidate call in and tell me his impressive qualifications on the high-paying job I was trying to fill. He shows up in a dirty white t-shirt, greasy hair, pants 3 inches too short, and the kicker was his underwear and balls were hanging out. Fastest interview I ever conducted just to give him the courtesy of one. I sanitized the lobby chair and interview chair. Story 9. Had a young gentleman come in, not dressed for the occasion. Posture was horrible as he was slouched over on the table. The interview committee introduces themselves and give him the chance for an introduction. He just says, "Look, I'm going to be real honest. My dad is making me go on interviews or else he's going to stop paying my bills." We continued through the interview and he actually answered questions genuinely, but it sucked wasting time on somebody we knew. We were not going to give the position. Story 10. A woman that went off on massive tangents every single question. For example, Q, you said you had negotiation training. Can you explain exactly what you received? Oh, yeah, so I went to training on with my current role. We got driven to the place by the rudest taxi driver I have ever met. He was eating some chips with toppings on it, like cheese and stuff. Have you ever had American cheater? It's to die for, etc. We had to constantly interpret them to get her back on track. It was a panel of 3 and 2 of us thought it was insanely funny. and had to hide our faces. It was super obvious, but the lady didn't notice. One of the panel, though, had no time for this and was getting really angry. During one question, the lady ended up talking about a seal that she saw on the beach, and my coworker put up their hand and just stopped. We then concluded the interview. You would have no idea this woman totally bombed this, as she was happy as Larry and chatting away. The woman then said, "I look forward to hearing from you." My coworker responded with, "Well, you really shouldn't." It was easily the worst interview I've ever been a part of, and I think about that woman and her seal often. Story 11 acted like she was interviewing us the entire time. I could see on her face that she really thought she had us under her thumb with her crafty attempt at manipulation, trying to convince my co-owner and I that we needed to impress her. She admitted she had no interest in the main components of our business and no experience in the field whatsoever. At the end of the interview, she shook my hand and said, "We will be in touch." Who is we? She emailed me a week later letting me know she would be taking the position with us as though we had offered it to her. I politely told her we were not interested and used my business term for "duck you." Best of luck to you in your future endeavors. Story 12. I was interviewing at a hiring event and had a few people scheduled for interviews that completed the application online and did the pre-screening interview over the phone. For people that did not, they could get stuck there for over an hour waiting to go through the multi-step process. So I took appointment time seriously. I was the only person hiring for my department. So anyone applying for anything in housekeeping had to do an interview with. Specifically, one girl was not on time for her appointment. So I started working through the other 6 or so applicants that had already been there 45 minutes. Shortly after I started one interview, the girl finally showed up, about 25 minutes late. The woman signing everyone in happened to be the recruitment manager for the region, and the girl that showed up late was rude to her when she wasn't immediately sent to me to interview. The recruitment manager told her that I was with someone and would be available soon, but the girl could not believe how rude we were to bump her appointment and not be available for her. She got up to complain to the recruiter several times, called her unprofessional and disorganized and crap like that. So I got done with the interview I was in, and the recruitment manager pulled me aside to warn me. At this point, I'm just humoring the girl and planned to do a quick 3 to 5 minute interview so I could get to better applicants. This girl told me how incompetent the receptionist was on our walk to the interview room. I asked the same basic questions I ask everyone, and instead of talking herself up, she explained that every coworker she ever has is horrible and lazy. She said that as a mother of 2, she's much more organized than other people. She insinuated that I was incompetent at my job for not being able to see her right when she walked in. Like I felt like I had to defend myself during her interview. It was so bad. She was a horrible person. Don't know why she thought insulting everyone would get her a job. Story 13. I sat in on an interview that was awkward on both sides. The woman had indicated on her application that she'd had a misdemeanor. My boss asked about it at the end of the interview, and she said she'd gotten a DUI charge a few years back, in college. He asked her a few follow-up questions about it. How much she'd been drinking, if she still drank, what she drank. She eventually just figured duck it, I guess, and gave us all the dirty details about how she'd just walked in on her boyfriend ducking her sister, and how it led to her kind of losing it in a bar downtown. I spent a lot of time pretending to be interested in reading her cover sheet. Story 14. I once gave an interview to a guy that had like 10 years worth of programming jobs but couldn't write a single line of code to solve the interview question. It was apparent in about 10 minutes that he wasn't going to figure it out, but we either couldn't or wouldn't just cut it short and show him the door. Story 15. Had an interview no-show during peak season. Dude showed up. I asked if he was so-and-so, and he said yeah. Aside from mostly grunting like a caveman, he had an odor that caused me to condense the interview to a few short and sweet questions. Turns out the no-show actually rescheduled for later that day, and I missed the memo. Never found out who that guy was or how he got into the office. Story 16. Myself and another male manager are a candidate's 3rd interview of the day. His previous meetings have been with women. With all of the women, he was super polite and professional, but when he got to the interview with 2 males, he went full Wall Street douche bro. Started the interview dropping the F-bomb in the first sentence. He was a completely different person around us. It was so weird when we all compared notes afterward. Story 17, got 2. First was one I did. Weirdly, was acutely a good interview, but ended proving how easy it is to misjudge. Was interviewing for an entry-level accounts clerk. We had this guy come in who was hugely overqualified, as in he had been a CFO of a medium-sized business. However, when we talked to him, he was straight and said, "I'm older, I'm due to retire in about 4 years, and I just want something to keep my mind going until I retire." He had all the right attitudes, so we hired him. He came in on the Monday, did his induction and all the paperwork, basic health and safety training, etc. Thing is that we were a restaurant company, and one of the company policies was that new hires had to do a few shifts in a store to get an idea of how the place is run. Nothing too strenuous. It's more a case of getting an idea of how people on the ground work than anything. This guy says that he has a medical condition which can make him faint if he gets too hot. Not a massive issue. We shifted him to a different store, larger front, newer so, better AC, etc. And spoke to the manager so he'd only be doing things like greeting customers, real light work, nothing in the kitchen or anything. You've even cut him down to 2 hours a day over 4 days. Usually it was a full 6 to 8 hour shift, all of which he agreed to. Halfway through Tuesday, the agency we'd used to hire him calls us. Apparently he called them, flipped out about how we weren't taking his medical issues seriously and how there's no way he'd work for us. Except we called the store manager and apparently he turned up for the shift. They asked him to help set the cutlery on the tables and he flipped out. He was there less than 10 minutes. The agency was really embarrassed about it because they'd bigged him up so much. Really embarrassed. They actually discounted our next hire because it made them look so bad. The second one was one at my mom's work. Guy was coming in to interview for a sales position at a car dealership. So a role where you have to look good and dress in suits, etc. He'd been sent by the local job center. He turned up to the interview in paint-covered overalls, hair messed up and with paint in it too, a general mess. The manager refused to even interview him and called up the job center to say, if he tries to use this towards his benefits claim, don't count it because he clearly didn't want to actually get the job. Story 18. Man brought his own lunch to an interview because he was into lifting and needed to make sure he ate at certain times. Started eating said meal during interview. Story 19. Interviewee here. But it wouldn't surprise me if I was the worst for this interviewer. I had moved to a new city/state about 3 weeks before. Prior to moving, I hadn't spent a lot of time in the area. I moved because my family had moved here after I graduated high school, and I needed a place after I screwed up college. This is my first interview in my new city. I am all prepared, and since this is early 2000, I even had directions printed from MapQuest, but I don't have a cell phone or GPS in my car. I head out to the interview and it says to turn on this street, but I can't find the street. I go home, call, ask for directions, and basically told the last 2 or 3 blocks, which is not where I was lost. I head back out and try again. I'm driving up and down the main street, and even backtracking and measuring distance to match up the street, and while there is a street here, a major one, the street name wasn't right at all. I finally went home, now very late, and called saying I was lost and had just moved here, and I needed directions from this point. Turned out the interviewer didn't know either. They had to find another employee to give me directions, which basically was, the street changes names at that intersection, that is why the distance was right and the name wrong. 10 minutes later, I am there, but a total mess at this point and an hour late. I walk in and introduce myself. The interviewer came out, looked me up and down, and told me there was no chance for the interview because I was so late and they had other people. No, they couldn't reschedule. If it had mattered that much to me, I should have been there on time. Looking back now, I get it. It was an entry-level job and I'm sure they had a dozen or more interviews, none of whom were an hour late or calling for directions. I totally screwed it up and now I can laugh at myself. But at 20, and trying to prove I wasn't a total screw-up, this was another nail in a coffin filled with them. Story 20. Quite a while ago now, something like 14 to 15 years, a guy turns up for an interview. He is completely unintelligible. He's brought his SCJP, Sun Certified Java Programmer certificate with him, but clearly doesn't know any Java, and best of all, his work permit is tied to his current employer. My second story is when I was the interviewee. The interviewer's question was, how would you reverse the order of bits in a byte? Because I had been working on very memory-constrained devices, I came up with a solution that used register rotation and the carry bit to do it super efficiently. The interviewer never said speed was the most important point, and he'd been looking for a lookup table answer. My solution was probably comparably fast, simply because it was all done on the CPU with no memory access. But he didn't get that. I still think he was a terrible interviewer, and I am quite glad I didn't get the job. Story 21. In my old job, we were hiring for a web content person to update the site with products, blogs, etc. He admitted in the interview that he hadn't even looked at our website. Afterwards, he asked for feedback and was told the truth, then pleaded to still be considered. From memory, he said, "I've looked at the website now." In my current job, we've just interviewed for a marketing officer. We were explicit in what they should provide, i.e., examples of their work online. One girl didn't provide anything but a CV that talked exclusively about her time at university. When she found out she wasn't progressing to interview, she demanded a reason, then sent a long, highly strung email about how a family member had passed away during university, and she was proud of her grades, and had definitely written blogs and stuff. Still, no links. It was passive-aggressive and weird. She may as well have written red flag 50 times in her email. Then, one girl who did come into interview gave off very odd vibes, like bad voodoo. She'd mistakenly written on her CV that she was currently looking for jobs in a different European city. we're in the UK. Our director decided not to ask her about it to save her embarrassment, but we had explicitly asked for great attention to detail, and she had given some awful answers, so I waited until the last minute and asked her. She turned bright red and became passive-aggressive. I asked her, if we offered you the job, and then a company in this other city offered you the job, which one would you pick? I was giving her the opportunity to reel it back, but she said, probably this one, because it would mean I wouldn't have to move.